Hi, this is Remembering the Past with Corey Franklin, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Wide range of subjects tonight, and we're going to start out with Dr. Sherwin Nuland, who died recently at the age of 83. Dr. Nuland was a nice Jewish boy born in the Bronx, and he became a surgeon at the Yale Medical Center, in fact, one of the most prominent surgeons in the country. But he's best known not for his surgical career, but for his writing career. After he retired from surgery, he became a writer. He incorporated his experience as a surgeon and also his experience in medical ethics and medical history, which he taught at Yale. And he wrote one of the classic books of our era. It was an extremely influential book. It was called How We Die. It won the National Book Award for Nonfiction in 1994 and was a finalist for the Pulitzer in 1995, didn't win. I incorporated a lot of Dr. Nuland's writing into my own writing. I didn't always agree with him. Some of the stuff he wrote in How We Die I didn't agree with, but there's no question that he was an influential writer, brilliant, and thought deeply about his subjects. Here's a brief interview with him outside where he talks about the influence of medicine on our society. And I lament that we don't have more people like Dr. Nuland in medicine today thinking about and talking about the things he talks about.
I think that if we can bring back the humanistic sense of healing, what we can do is provide a generation or generations of physicians who have a sense of their own responsibility, their own, what the ethicists call deontological sense, obligation to repair the world and bring healing and peace. So yes, I think of all of the professions, medicine is most likely to provide the means for healing the world. I don't think there's any doubt. In addition to which, medicine is international. It's always been international. So boundaries of state, tribal boundaries have no significance whatsoever in medicine.
One of our most talented physician writers. Well, you certainly can't argue with his desire to bring back the humanistic side of medicine. The only problem is I see it going the other way. I see the pendulum swinging against him. But it's important that we note that Dr. Sherwin Nuland was one of the people who had a respect for the profession, and along with that, a respect for the patient. And that's something that we need far more of in medicine today. We're going to move on now with our feature tonight. Our feature is James Tague, who died recently at the age of 77. And James Tague is a critical figure in the Kennedy assassination on November 22nd, 1963. He was standing under the underpass when Lee Harvey Oswald fired the shots that hit John Kennedy and John Connally. And James Tague was hit by either a portion of the first bullet or a portion of the concrete that the first bullet hit before the second bullet, otherwise known as the magic bullet, wounded both Kennedy and Connally, and the third bullet killed Kennedy. Tague was standing fairly far away from the Texas School Book Depository, and at first his story looked like it contradicted the Warren Commission, because the initial theory of the Warren Commission was that 3 separate bullets hit Kennedy and Connally, 2 bullets hitting Kennedy and 1 hitting Connally, and they had to account for the fact that James Tague was hit by a bullet fragment or a concrete fragment from a bullet that didn't appear to have hit either one. That's what generated the magic bullet theory, which is actually not a magic bullet, as we talked about in our Arlen Specter podcast, but simply a bullet that passed through both Kennedy and Connally at a high velocity to 2 people who were sitting very close to each other, in line with each other. So the first bullet was the one that hit James Tague, or it hit the concrete, and the concrete flew up and hit him. Of course, the people who cite James Tague as contradicting the Warren Commission actually don't realize that his story supports the Warren Commission, because he could have only been hit from a bullet fired from in front of him, which would have meant behind Kennedy and Connally. There was no way that a bullet could be fired from the front of Kennedy and Connally and hit James Tague. And the only 2 places that could have come from are either the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository or the 2nd floor of the Dale Tex building. And we have pretty good evidence that the 2nd floor of the Dale Tex building did not have a gunman in it. So the point is that James Tague's wound, whether it was from concrete or from the bullet itself, had to come from a shot from behind John Kennedy and John Connally. And based on the trajectories of Kennedy and Connally's wounds and the bullet that was found, the only place that could have come from was the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Here's an AOL report on James Tague and the events in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963.
I was on 7th Freeway earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the president as he made his way towards the Trade Mart.
I'm James Tague, and when I was driving downtown, the sun was out, and it was a pretty November day. And as I come under the triple underpass, traffic stops all of a sudden. So I get out of my car and walk to the openness of the Dealey Plaza. Here comes a car with two flags on it. Hey, this is the president. I remember reading about him.
The president's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark.
And there's a pop of a firecracker. And I wonder what kind of idiot is throwing firecrackers with the president driving by.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
Then the crack, two rifle shots. Something stings me in the face.
Jim Tague is a unique witness. He was in Dealey Plaza the day of the assassination by accident, and a missed bullet hit the curb by him, and pieces of concrete cut him on the cheek.
There's numerous people running up the hill alongside Elm Street, there by the Simmons Freeway. Several police officers are rushing up the hill at this time.
I ducked back behind the concrete of the overpass over Dealey Plaza. And a picture that was taken of me was taken 3 seconds later when I'm peeking back out, trying to figure out what had just happened. It was just skin deep. That's all there was to it. It was a very minor injury. I didn't go to the doctor or hospital or anything.
President Kennedy has been given a blood transfusion at Parkland Hospital here in Dallas in an effort to save his life after he and Governor John Connally of Texas were shot in an assassination attempt in downtown Dallas. A priest has been ordered emergency.
There's only one word to describe the picture here, and that's grief, and much of it. It's official. As of just a few moments ago, the President of the United States is dead.
The Warren Commission was going to settle with 3 shots, 3 hits, 2 shots to the president, 1 shot to the governor. But because Mr. Tague was near the missed shot, they had to account for the missed shot. And so they created what they call the single bullet theory, where 1 bullet went through the president and the governor, 1 shot missed, and the other shot killed the president.
Well, they had to go back and rewrite the Warren report. This time they wrote it with 1 shot missed. My testimony changed history. I don't think 50 years later I've still absorbed the fact that I just happened to be there that day.
Well, James Tague's testimony certainly did change history, and for those of you who are still following at home, let's review. First shot by Lee Harvey Oswald at approximately zapper frame 160, missed Kennedy and Connally, hit the concrete, bullet never found, and either a bullet fragment or concrete hit Tague in the cheek. Second bullet fired at about frame 223, about 3 seconds later, went through Kennedy's throat and went through Connally's chest, wrist, and thigh. The bullet was found at Parkland Memorial Hospital on the stretcher that John Connally was laying. Third shot about 5 seconds later, zapper frame approximately 313, hit Kennedy in the head. There was no conceivable trajectory where a bullet could have been fired from another direction to make the wound that it made in Kennedy's head. Fragments of the third bullet were found in front of the back seat of the limousine. 3 shots, 7.5 to 8 seconds, 2 hits, 1 miss, and the miss is what made James Tague famous and his testimony change history. We're going to move on now to Alain Resnais, famous French film director who died recently at the age of 91. Resnais is renowned across Europe, but he's also well known in the United States for 2 films he made. The first was Hiroshima Mon Amour in 1959, and the second was Last Year At Marienbad in 1961. It's also worth adding that before he did those films, he was doing shorter documentaries, and he did Night and Fog in 1955, which was one of the first films to document for a movie audience the Nazi death camps. Here's a brief report on Alain Resnais from the BBC4's Last Word with Asma Mir.
Now, Alain Resnais was a French film director who used innovative editing techniques to add depth and mystery to his work. He started off making short films and documentaries before moving on to feature films. His best-known works were Hiroshima Mon Amour in 1959 and Last Year At Marienbad in 1961, which delighted and confused audiences in equal measure. Agnès Poirier is a French film critic and a big fan of his work.
He enrolled in the National Film School in Paris during the occupation, and because he was born in the early 20s, surrealism was extremely important to him. His films are just full of surrealist wit and absurdity, the absurdity of life. At the National Film School, he didn't choose film directing, he chose editing, which is interesting because he actually learned his craft through making a lot of documentaries. Probably the whole world remembers Night and Fog, his documentary on the death camps, which at the time, 1955, was the first film really to disclose those unbearable images to a very, very wide audience.
How did he move from short films and documentaries, etc., into longer form?
After Night and Fog, which sort of set him, at the center of European cinema, he, in 1959, did Hiroshima Mon Amour, which was a shock for cinephiles in the world. It is based on a Marguerite Duras script, and again, Alain Resnais, you have to know this because it's, unlike all other French authors, he didn't actually write his own scripts. And Hiroshima Mon Amour is this very long and intense conversation between two lovers, one French and one Japanese, and it debates the meaning of memory of the war of existence, and it doesn't have any clear narrative structure. It is intensely erotic, and it did strike a chord with the world audience of the late 50s.
Tell us a bit more about the editing. Some people loved it and others found it difficult to kind of get beyond. Just explain how he would use different editing techniques in his films.
Let's take, for instance, Hiroshima Mon Amour. A lot of flashbacks, a lot of voiceovers. You'll hear her talk to her lover, but in her head, and a lot of long silent sequences as well. It's very much experimentalist, but it's also hypnotic.
Well, we move from the sublime to the ridiculous. Alain Resnais is for you art film listeners out there, and I'm sure that's not the same crowd who listened to our last subject tonight, Jim Lange, who died recently at the age of 81. Jim Lange was a West Coast DJ in San Francisco and LA. He did some television in the early 60s. He was the announcer for Tennessee Ernie Ford, but he got his big break in 1965 when ABC, the upstart network, went with a youth movement while CBS was doing all their rural comedies and NBC was trying to be more serious. ABC was looking for the youth market, so they started featuring shows that featured young people, hip haircuts, colorful stuff, the Batman kind of stuff. And one of the shows they picked up was Chuck Barris's Dating Game. So they borrowed the hip West Coast DJ Jim Lange, and he became the host of the first Dating Game, which was sort of the original precursor to today's Bachelor. Here's a little bit from the Dating Game and Jim Lange.
From the Chuck Barris stages in Hollywood, California, here's the star of the show and your host, Jim Lange.
Thank you. You're beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you and welcome once again. Here we go on the old Dating Game. It's time to meet our first three eligible bachelors for game number one. And here they are. Good luck, guys.
You're beautiful. If that's not ABC 1965, I don't know what is. I'm going to close on that note, and I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. And we were talking about ABC in the mid-60s in the youth market, and the key person in that was the man we mentioned before, Chuck Barris. Chuck Barris was a nice Jewish boy from Philadelphia, and he developed the Dating Game that got Jim Lange his start. And he also developed other classics such as the Newlywed Game and the Gong Show. So there are a lot of people that have Chuck Barris to thank besides Jim Lange. Chuck Barris was living testimony to H.L. Mencken's phrase, "No one ever went broke," underestimating the tastes of the American public. He wrote his autobiography a couple years ago, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, and he made all sorts of stuff up, that he was a CIA spy and a hitman. He loved to put people on, as you can tell by the types of shows he developed. But one thing he didn't make up is that he liked to write music. He wrote the theme song for the Dating Game that you heard there. And he used to work at American Bandstand in Philly. And he ran into a guy named Freddie Cannon. And he wrote a song for him that became Freddie Cannon's biggest hit in March of 1962 about a New Jersey amusement park. So here it is, Palisades Park, as our send away to Jim Lange, who worked for Chuck Barris.
Last night I took a walk